Hello, this is Danny Raymond, the voice behind Ray's Guide. This video is sponsored by Southern New Hampshire University and their online bachelor's degree in computer game programming. More on that later. I've spent most of the last weekend playing Manor Lords early access release as soon as it became available, and it's quite clear that I'm not alone in that. And the top line is that if you enjoy simulation games with some strategy, you will indeed get your money's worth out of the current $30 early access introductory sale price, since there has already been plenty of detailed how-to content from those who, unlike me, received preview copies. I'm going to mostly talk about the Manor Lords game design and leapfrog all those reviewers and talk about where it might go in the future, about Manor Lords 2, and the phenomenon of the sophomore slump. Because some of the biggest makers of Manor Lords early access content are folks like Biffa and City Planner, who no doubt expected that right now their channels would be sailing along on their City Skyline 2 content. But City Skylines 2 has had a sophomore slump, making City Skylines 1 seem outdated and City Skylines 2 disappointing. And into that gap stepped this charming little medieval village that seemed entirely different yet scratched the same itch. Which means, lesson 1, there's no substitute for being at the right place at the right time. Lesson 2 is that apparently nobody in 2024 is deterred from buying a great game because it is early access, which is the first connection between this game, 600 years in the past, and the game I usually play 900 years in the future. If anything now, early access is kind of a sales point from the FOMO angle. And yes, Manor Lords is definitely early access. You often see placeholder text and prompts, and major portions of the development and policy trees are unimplemented. And there is, for the moment, one map and one tileset style. Although different tilesets and maps could be part of an expansion DLC packs, you never know, which is the other attraction of early access. It's an interesting point in a game's development. It's still uncertain adolescence, and this merges well with the compelling metastory behind Manor Lords. That many years of labor of love by a single developer with a vision, although helped with a lot of contracted work, with established studios in the game industry having layoffs and delivering competent but underwhelming titles like City Skylines 2 and Starfield, having a single developer with a vision be able to create a refreshing breakout hit is, as they say, the kind of feel-good story we need right now. I can only imagine the number of programmers who took their old pet project off the mental shelf and gave it a good look. Who knows, maybe you did too. And if when you did you realized you would need an update of your knowledge, then there's our sponsor, the online Bachelor of Science in Game Programming and Development from Southern New Hampshire University. Or conversely, if your direction is in game art, there's the Bachelor of Arts in Game Art and Development and the Bachelor of Arts in User Experience Design. All reflect the latest theory and most current tools like the Unreal Engine and latest Adobe Creative Suite. And those are just some of the over 200 career-focused programs that SNHU offers, all of which have among the lowest cost per unit of regionally accredited online universities, and which allow up to 90 units of a 120-unit degree be transfer credits. So it could be a great opportunity if you have a partially completed degree, but life commitments have gotten in the way of finishing it during normal school times. If any of this sounds interesting, visit snhu.edu/raisguide and fill out the form to speak to a real person about bridging your medieval past to your science fiction future. That's snhu.edu/raisguide. Which brings me back to Manor Lords and the singular vision of the game. And I think that is truly the key to where Manor Lords succeeds where so many other recent big studios have disappointed. The whole game had to fit inside the single creator's head. And so you can feel like the entire vision can also fit in your head. Manor Lords has mapped out a particular territory at the intersection of some much larger terrains. It's a city builder simulation, but not everything in a city builder, like services and budgets. It has strategy elements, but not to the level of, say, Crusader Kings. It has real-time strategy elements, but not everything of an RTS game. The developer has mapped out this very specific territory, and everything works efficiently and directly towards that goal. The simulation is involved, but always understandable because it had to be understood by that single developer. So, for example, you start the game with 5 families and 1 ox. And the ox has a name. And you will get to know the name of that ox because they are the most valuable contributor to the whole town. So the obvious thought is, when do you get a second ox? Right away? But that would take a substantial part of the town's wealth and might be better spent on a vegetable garden or chicken coop to provide food through the winter.
Winter is coming.
An interesting choice, a nuanced choice, and the first of a web of interrelated resource paths. But a choice where the cause and effect are straightforward and understandable, not one that's going to have you immediately having you alt-tab out to a spreadsheet to figure it out, because you feel that it is graspable without needing to do that. And that was, for example, one of the things that it felt disappointing about City Skylines 2, that the behind-the-scenes simulation was so opaque that it felt like you had no clear idea what was going to be the result of adding a lane here or a bit of commercial zoning there. I've also expressed similar concern about the quanti-economic system proposed for Star Citizen, that from the player's standpoint, it is completely opaque. That's not the case with Manor Lords. Everything's comprehensible. In addition, with Manor Lords, there's a sense that everything about the game was created with and towards that single clear vision of what the game was. Doesn't it kind of seem like, in Starfield, for example, that the ship combat was created by an entirely different team than the ground combat, and that they didn't really speak to each other? Or that the various quest lines are so different in their vision and appearance that how do they exist in the same universe? And this is what is fundamentally behind the sophomore slump. That great initial games often have their follow-up title not live up to expectations. So, for example, the Total War series, which many people say resembles the combat in Manor Lords, still has the very first Rome Total War widely regarded as the best of the long series. But the game I'm most reminded of in this regard is another game that found a perfect territory at the intersection of other genres, and that was the original 1998 PC adaptation of the arcade game Battlezone. And it combined elements of first-person shooter, high-speed flight, or rather hovercraft, and real-time strategy elements of collecting resources and using them to make more ships. And then wrapped over all this was a thin campaign story about the Cold War and the Apollo program being faked. Not because it didn't happen, but it was a cover story for the rapid militarization of the moon and solar system. The low-gravity hovercraft physics were frankly perfectly done, even by today's standards, and the mayhem was delightful. So, for example, you could be in a high-speed battle, be destroyed, automatically eject, and then while slowly falling to the lunar gravity, get out your rifle, look down the scope, and snipe the pilot of the opposing craft through their windshield before landing, whereupon you might be immediately run over by one of your own tanks that couldn't get out of the way fast enough, because, frictionless. Yes, it was as fun as it sounds, and I still regard it as one of the best game designs ever in the blend of thinking and mayhem at once. And then came along Battlezone 2, Combat Commander, and they added heft to all the areas that anybody thought was thin, such as the storyline, and that weighed down the thinking and mayhem that made the original so delightful. And so it was the end of the Battlezone franchise. Although, if you're curious, they have repackaged the original work on current hardware for $20 on Steam, and it's still a hoot for people who like classic action games. And that brings me again around to the subject of the sophomore slump, in particular with games that straddle two or more defined genres. There is so much capacity to draw further and further into those genres that they can become an incomprehensible mess, particularly if the now larger development team compartmentalizes into the team that's pushing more into the one genre, and the team that's pushing more into the other genre, and the team that's pushing more into the third genre. And that is why, several years from now, you should be cautious about getting too excited about Manor Lords 2. It's not inevitable that it will have a sophomore slump, but it would have plenty of company. Now, for my usual Star Citizen viewers wanting to take part in the ship giveaways, the secret word for this video is the classic PC game that CIG could learn a bit about hovercraft gameplay from. Fly safe, keep it real, and I'll see you in the verse. This is Daniel Raymond for Ray's Guide.